Because I think on this whole topic of fear and transparency, I think we're hearing from the panel that, being honest and transparent is, 9 times out of 10 your best bet. I mean, Tanya, if you have somebody who's on probation and they've relapsed, I mean, do you want to know that?
Absolutely.
I mean, or do you want to find out about that in 3 weeks or a month's time?
I want to know that. And in fact, when my clients come to me and they're honest, it's almost like a reward. If I have a client who comes and sees me and they say, I relapsed, I used last night, a lot of officers will want to go have them drop to make it official, to get the paperwork so that they have something to use in court. I don't do that. I mean, I'm not going to say I never do that because my role is law enforcement and I understand that, but if it's initial, I can even go a few times. And it's not what my bosses want me to do because there's protocols to what my job entails. But with this population, I appreciate when they tell me the truth. When they tell me I relapsed, that tells me I want help. Because someone who doesn't want help and wants to continue to use is going to hide, is going to lie, is going to be, just run around and not show up, et cetera, et cetera. So when I have a client that's going to tell me, hey, I relapsed, I know this person wants help. And so my first inclination is to get them what they need. If that's another stent in inpatient treatment or more outpatient treatment, or if they're already seeing a counselor, connect with that person, make sure everyone's on the same page and figure out what do we need to do for this person so that A, they don't continue using, and B, so that they stay safe. That's my priority. So, and like I said, that's very different, and that's not, unfortunately, how every officer handles their cases, but I know that the tide is turning, and more we're realizing that, again, that punitive approach isn't working, and if we're going to get ahead on this problem, we have to be more understanding and meet that client where they're at.
So when, if ever, do you notify the judges that this person, by the way, since the last time I saw you, relapsed so many times? And how does the judge receive that information at that point?
So absolutely, that's a good question, of course, because again, my role is law enforcement. So let's say I get all heroin cases. So my first thing when I first meet that client, I need to know when was the last time that you used, and are you in a position where you need help immediately, or what can I do? How can I help you? So once that's determined, 90% of my cases enter inpatient treatment. And inpatient treatment in Illinois right now is under 30 days with insurance. Unfortunately, that's a whole nother forum, but we won't go there. But if that's all I can get, then that's what I need. So they'll go into inpatient, and then I work with the counselor and find out what is their aftercare plan. Whatever that is that counselor tells me that my client needs is what I'm going to push with that client, whether that be meetings, sponsor, more classes, whatever it is. So as this is all happening, Your Honor, then they sometimes slip, and then that's when I'll again restart, like, okay, what do we need? So about, I would say, if I had to put a number on it, and it really does depend on each person and the client and the story and what's going on in that person's life, but probably around like the third time. If it's like, okay, we are working with you, we keep doing this, and you keep making a bad decision, then maybe I'll start the process. And that would mean for me filing a violation of probation, notifying the state, this is what's going on, let's go in front of the judge and make the judge aware of the situation. That sometimes helps me a lot because then now they're in front of the judge, it's gotten a little bit more scary, they're kind of potentially starting to get into trouble where they might be losing their freedom or other things that they don't want to deal with. So that sometimes will be what helps get them back on track. So basically is when I see that they're not serious about recovery or wanting to maintain that sobriety and recovery. And again, it's a case-by-case basis, so go ahead, Chelsea. So I don't know,
Okay. How many, I would like to know from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
How many of those cases do you think have treatment plans that aren't working for them, or alternative mechanisms for treatment that aren't being considered within the criminal justice system?
Wow. I mean, that's
That's a
an
tough
excellent
question,
case, and
but-
it is. But I would say probably most of them.
And why I ask that is because the way, like you said earlier, that the criminal justice system has not caught up to the times yet.
Absolutely.
And I firmly believe that, because we know that there are evidence-based practices like medication-assisted treatments, and when I say that to the audience, I mean treatments like methadone and buprenorphine products and naltrexone products for opioid use disorder, and there's also medications for tobacco use disorder and alcohol use disorder that often do not get wrapped into the conversation, that are evidence-based, that we know work. There's a lot of efficacy data around them. If done well, if done appropriately by a licensed addiction physician in combination with a licensed clinical social worker, hopefully, we're doing that. That's the model that at least NIDA is suggesting that we follow in ASAM. However, that has not translated yet into the criminal justice system, and this is something that I see by and large on a daily basis. Relapse, right? We know relapse is a part of the disease. What I'm curious about, though, is we know that we have these medications, and not everybody needs to use them. That's not something that everybody needs to do. But we know that they reduce cravings. We know that they reduce withdrawal symptoms that are going to make somebody want to go out and use or engage in the behavior that's fueling their addiction. But then we call them weak. We call them not sober. We do this stigmatizing crap. Frankly, it's crap that I don't take well to, because it saves people's lives, genuinely does.
Absolutely.
And then you may want to recommend that.
Yeah,
So what happens when you do
absolutely.
recommend that, and or how can you intervene with maybe the treatment provider to maybe adjust the treatment plan?
Absolutely. The good news is that we are catching up to, and that's another model of harm reduction. MAT, medically assisted treatment, is something that I would say right now 90% of my clients are on. I'm pro MAT. I push MAT. That's one of the first questions that I ask when my client comes in is, are you interested in this? Because when I send them off to inpatient treatment, a lot of our treatment agencies in Lake and Cook County have now developed programs that are specifically MAT. So they will prescribe and give the client whichever one of those medications are appropriate for that person, so they can get started, that can help them with their recovery and sustain some long-term sobriety. I'm 100% pro MAT again, and thank God the department in Lake County, we're on board. And it's taken some time, because I did drug court for 7 years, and in the beginning, we wouldn't take people who were on MAT into the program, because it was like this mentality that it was another drug, and now it's come full circle where my boss, Steve, is 100% on board with MAT. It's just because we see the data, the evidence, and it's working for people. So the bottom line is we have to look at saving lives. At the end of the day, that's what matters. And if that is a tool that is going to help us with that, then by all means, we're 100%.
And you guys are giving out Narcan too.
Yes, we
which
are.
I think is very cool.
I give out Narcan to all my clients' families. I ask my clients if whoever you live with, whether it's a partner, a spouse, a parent, do they have Narcan? And if not, I will be over to the house to explain to them how to use it and give them a kit. Because I know that if they overdose at that house and there's not a kit there, then that's a possibility of a death that didn't have to be a death if they have that tool. So I'm all pro Narcan, I'm pro MAT, I'm pro whatever works at this point, because that's how serious this problem is.
And that reminds me of one issue with respect to the civil cases. So let's say you are wrapping up and that you have, you've reached an agreement and you're going to use X, Y, or Z in order to monitor and in order to treat. I have seen, in cases that I've inherited, language that really is not proper in that, and you can probably speak to this more, in that they had anticipated that this would be the standard, and they said, this is how we're going to do this. This is how we're going to measure this, and this is how we're going to treat it. And some of these measurements are antiquated and they're not used anymore. And so when you enter into agreements, when you're going to finalize your cases in civil court, you're actually signing a contract. And so then they say, but judge, you can't change that because it's a contract that we had. So you're tying my hands if you say the way we're going to measure this person's success in recovery is by using this set of data, and that data is no longer the standard. And so be careful of that when those issues arise so that you don't limit yourself, so that the language is broad enough that it can change with the time, so to speak. And I'm sure, Greg, you've probably drafted a number.
I've never particularly run into that issue where, years down the line, the metric used, but I could see something along the lines of, you have to take a drug test X at X frequency, and then you get into a MAT treatment, and that very well may cause you to, come up positive on that test. And if that's what that agreement said, which is, like she said, it's a contract really about the strongest one you can get because it's one that was stamped by a court, not just signed by individuals or entities. You find yourself in trouble. And now I'd like to think, judges could get more creative to say this doesn't really fit within the intent, but that's still an argument you're going to have and pay to have. So you want to try to. I've never thought about that, but you definitely want to take that into consideration when you're drafting the language to have it be malleable enough to change with science.
And therapies, right?
I think therapy is a form of science.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly with medicated assisted treatment, I think that it's also taken a long time for even people in the addiction field to catch up to that too. And particularly in 12-step programs, a lot of times, even still, there is this mentality that if you are taking something like Suboxone, you're not sober. And unfortunately, that drives a lot of people, I think, out of the program and back to, something that is going to get them into trouble, And so we strongly agree with you, that MAT treatment is really important, particularly with heroin users. That it's not a sign of weakness to accept that help. That it's actually a sign of strength that can give you enough of a bubble to bring you up to the surface, to get your head clear, and to really start to understand what's happening underneath the surface. And whether it's a long-term commitment to something like Suboxone or a short-term commitment, I think that's up to each doctor to work out with their own patient. But I think certainly it's something that is really helpful, especially in the beginning of sobriety.
Yeah. And if it's something new, I would urge you not to be afraid to ask your lawyer to bring it to the judge, to say, this is what we're contemplating doing. This is really what's going to help in the recovery, and to educate the judges on this. I seek out extra education. I look for it. And so I didn't come to the bench with anything other than my law degree and my experience, but I seek to learn more about this topic, and so I seek it out. I don't know that everybody that everyone's going to appear in front of, if you happen to do that, has had an opportunity or the interest to do that. And so sometimes you have to be the educator, your advocate, and some people are self-represented, and so it can seem very scary. But in Cook County especially, we are doing as much as we can to give access to the courts to people that are self-represented litigants. So even if you don't have a lawyer, don't be afraid to bring the data to the judges and to ask them to consider this form of treatment.
And I love that Her Honor just said this, because I think that's one of the reasons I get up in the morning is, we can't expect judges for state's attorneys or lawyers to just get what we think they should do. So that's when you go and you write laws. And I think that that's one of the things that a lot of citizens don't know that they have the power to do too, is to advocate for policy change. You can write a law all on your own. You can walk into your legislator's office, you can explain to them the problem that you're facing, or that many people are facing. The more data you have, the better, to back up what you're saying. And you can literally write laws and change policy that the judges have to uphold in a courtroom. Her Honor is reading from a law book right now. So policy is what they end up going off of to make their decisions, because it's legal or it's not legal. Oftentimes it's that black and white.
If I had $1 for every time I said, I do follow the law.
That's what I think citizens kind of, I think we elect our judges, we also elect our legislators, and we also have the ability to go and change laws. We don't know we do because we're not taught how, but we do. And I think everybody has the power in this room to do that. It's just the how.
Which is saying,
Which was a whole other panel.
Be an activist. Speak
Be an
up.
activist, yes.
The
Vote.
law's going to follow slowly behind what the community is hearing and saying, and I commend the two of you for the work that you're doing and really leading us, with some people dragging their feet clearly, but leading us forward. And judges are limited sometimes in what they can do because they have to follow the law, and if they don't, they're going to get overturned on appeal. So we all should be activists and paying attention to what's going on, paying attention to who's being elected, and because that does make a difference. The laws will change slowly, but they do change.
And let me give you a quick example of exactly what she's talking about is naloxone. Naloxone didn't just come out of nowhere, okay? Naloxone has been around since the 60s, by the way, used in the medical community. It's a drug that reverses opioid overdose. If you've not heard of it, it's also called Narcan. We knew in Lake County, State's Attorney Nierheim and I were trying to figure out how do we solve this overdose crisis. And one of our barriers was that law enforcement could not utilize naloxone. They're the ones on the scene, they're the ones coming to the home, they're the ones with the power to save the life that they're literally physically looking at on the ground, waiting for ambulances to show up while the brain is slowly dying. And they know that they have the power in their hands to do that. And the one thing that was our barrier to creating more life-saving opportunities was the immunity piece for them. They couldn't do this legally. And it was going to be hard to argue whatever could potentially happen in a courtroom. And to me, who's lost a sibling to this, I didn't find that at the time to be a big deal. But to them, it was a big deal, and it is a big deal, and I've since learned why. So making naloxone immune for lay people and immune for, especially for first responders, it was game changing, because now any first responder can access it and they can utilize it. Tanya can utilize it, a judge can utilize it, anybody can utilize it. Without those laws passing, we would have lost way more people. We would be thousands of deaths a year more than we are right now. So the power to pass laws, the power of the citizen to vote and to choose is huge. And it's a right, and it's something that we take advantage of. It's something that we don't know we should be grateful for that right. And I hate to say it like that because other countries, you can't do the same thing. You just can't. But you can here.
And the only thing David forgot was to have a register outside here that could register you to vote in case you're not.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
You can do it on your
And then we'll
phone.
tell you who to
you could right
vote
now.
for.
Everybody take out their phones and register.